Sir, listen, I got a call about aggressive behavior here. Loud yelling, possible threats.
A call? This is my home. My family's here. There is no threat.
Keep your hands visible. ID now.
Okay, slowly. I'm a sitting judge. I haven't broken any law.
That doesn't change the call. Turn around.
So this is how it works. One call, and I'm already guilty.
The first police siren cut through the summer evening like a blade. Laughter stopped. Smoke from the grill hung in the air. Children froze mid-step. Across a quiet suburban street, a neighbor stood on his porch, phone pressed to his ear, watching a black family barbecue as if it were a crime scene in progress. Within minutes, squad cars arrived. What no one there knew yet was this. The man being reported wasn't just a homeowner, he was a judge, and this call would cost someone everything. Stories like this don't reveal themselves all at once. They unfold slowly through silence, power, and consequence. If you care about how authority, bias, and accountability collide in real life, stay with this story. What happens next is documented and disturbing. Where are you watching this video from? Have you ever seen something like this happen to you or someone else? The heat hadn't broken yet. It lingered in the pavement, in the hedges, in the slow-moving air that made even breathing feel deliberate. Smoke rose gently from the grill, carrying the smell of charred meat and sweet marinade across the backyard. Someone laughed loud, unguarded. A child chased a bubble that shimmered briefly, then vanished. It was the kind of evening neighborhoods advertise themselves with: quiet, safe, predictable. Across the street, a man stood still on his porch. He had been watching for a while. The judge didn't notice him at first. He was turning burgers with practiced ease, sleeves rolled up, bare forearms glistening in the fading sun. His wife moved between the picnic table and the kitchen, setting down plates, reminding people gently to eat before the food got cold. Music played low. Nothing loud enough to carry beyond the fence. Nothing that broke any rule, written or unwritten. Then the siren came. At first, it sounded distant, just a faint wail folding into the evening like a wrong note. No one reacted. Sirens passed by all the time. Highways weren't far. But this one didn't fade. It grew sharper, closer. Another joined it. Then another. Conversation thinned. The laughter faltered. Someone turned the music down without being asked. By the time the first patrol car turned onto the street, red and blue light washing over manicured lawns, the judge felt something shift in his chest. Not fear, not yet, but recognition. The kind that comes from long experience, from knowing how quickly context can be stripped away. A child asked, "Daddy, why are the police here?" He didn't answer. He wiped his hands on a towel and looked toward the curb. Inside the first squad car, the officer's body camera was already recording. A small yellow logo blinked steadily as the vehicle slowed to a stop. The timestamp would later matter. 6:42 p.m. Dispatch audio would show the call came in 3 minutes earlier. Caller reports a group of aggressive males. Caller states possible weapons. Caller says they don't belong here. The dispatcher's voice was neutral, trained. No emotion, no inflection, just procedure. The system did not ask what the caller meant by aggressive. It did not ask how many people constituted a group. It did not ask why a family gathering on a Saturday evening had escalated to emergency. It asked only for an address. The neighbor remained on his porch as the cars arrived, phone still in his hand, posture upright, confident. He would later say he was just being cautious, that he had concerns, that he had every right to call. From his vantage point, the scene looked different. He saw unfamiliar cars parked along the curb. He heard voices he didn't recognize. He saw black men laughing loudly, louder than he was used to. In his mind, something crossed an invisible line. Suspicion, once formed, moved quickly. The first officer stepped out, hand resting near his belt, eyes already scanning. The second car pulled in behind him. Doors opened almost in unison. The lights stayed on. The judge walked forward slowly, deliberately, hands visible. He had done this before, not like this, not at his own home, but enough to know the choreography. Calm, measured, non-confrontational. "Evening, officers," he said. The words hung there. Neutral, polite. The officers didn't respond immediately. One asked for the noise complaint. The other asked who lived there. Their voices were clipped, procedural, carrying the authority of habit rather than hostility. "Yet, I do," the judge replied. "Is there a problem?" Behind him, the backyard had gone silent. Plates rested untouched. Someone reached for a phone, then thought better of it. Children were pulled closer to adults without explanation. The neighbor finally spoke, pointing vaguely toward the yard. "That's them," he said. "I told dispatch I didn't feel safe." The phrase landed heavier than it should have. Didn't feel safe. The judge turned toward him. Recognition flickered across his face, not of the man himself, but of the situation, of how this story would be told without him. "Sir," the judge said. "Steady. This is my family. We're having a barbecue." One of the officers raised a hand slightly. Not aggressive, not friendly, just enough to slow the moment down. "Okay," he said, "we need everyone to remain where they are. Remain where they are." In that instant, the judge understood something had already been decided, not consciously, not maliciously, but procedurally. The call had framed the response. The response now framed him. He was no longer a homeowner explaining a misunderstanding. He was a subject in an active call. Red and blue light pulsed across his face, washing out the familiar lines, flattening him into something easier to categorize. Across the street, the neighbor lowered his phone. The call had done its work. The grill hissed quietly as fat dripped onto flame. No one moved to turn it off. And somewhere in the background, a body camera kept recording, capturing the moment when at evening crossed a line it would ne'er uncross. The officer closest to him shifted his stance. Not forward, not back, just enough to widen his base. A trained posture, balanced, ready. The judge noticed it immediately. He noticed everything now. The way questions were no longer open-ended. The way the word "sir" had disappeared. "Can I see some ID?" the officer asked. Of course, the judge said, reaching slowly toward his back pocket. He paused, eyes lifting. "May I?" The officer nodded once. The wallet came out, leather worn soft with time. Inside, driver's license, credit cards, and a card heavier than the rest. When the judge handed it over, he didn't announce it. He didn't posture. He didn't raise his voice. He let the credential speak for itself. The officer glanced at the driver's license first. Name, address, same street, same house. His eyes flicked up toward the yard, then back down. Then he saw the second card, judicial identification. There was a pause, not long but long enough. The second officer leaned in slightly. Their shoulders almost touched. A quiet exchange of looks, a recalibration. "This yours?" the first officer asked. "Yes," the judge said. "I'm a sitting judge in this state. If there's an issue, I'm happy to resolve it." The words were calm, measured, the kind of tone that usually ended misunderstandings before they grew legs. This time they didn't. The officer turned the card over once, then again, as if texture might reveal intent. He handed it back, but not with recognition, with dismissal. "We still need to sort out why we got called here," he said. "Credentials don't change that." The judge nodded slowly. "Understood. But there is no issue, no disturbance, no threat. My family is, sir," the officer cut in, not loud, just firm. "I need you to step back toward the driveway." The command landed harder than the volume suggested. Around them, the silence thickened. Someone whispered his name from behind him, his wife's voice, but careful, restrained, already calculating what compliance would cost and what resistance might take. He stepped back. Police training manuals describe this moment clinically. Scene control, establishing dominance not through force but positioning. Once an officer issues a command and it's followed, the hierarchy locks in, curiosity narrows, control expands. The judge felt it happening in real time. Another officer arrived. Then another. 3 cars now. Neighbors emerged onto porches under the pretense of checking mail or watering plants. Phones came out. The barbecue was no longer private. It was public theater. "What exactly did the caller report?" the judge asked. The question was reasonable, logical. Grounded in the law he knew intimately, the officer didn't answer it. Instead, he asked, "Have you been drinking tonight?" "No." "Anyone here intoxicated?" "No." "Any weapons on the premises?" "No." Each answer was clipped. Each one fed a checklist. None of them seemed to reduce suspicion. In fact, the more cooperative he was, the less human he became in their eyes. Compliance had flattened him into a variable. The neighbor crossed the street then, slowly, hands free. No commands directed his way. "That's the man," he said, gesturing toward the judge. "I told dispatch they were acting aggressive. Yelling. I didn't feel safe." The judge turned toward him. "Aggressive?" he asked quietly. "We were grilling." The neighbor shrugged. "Didn't sound like it to me." No one asked the neighbor for ID. The officer closest to the judge raised his voice just slightly. "Sir, I need you to face away from me." The judge froze. This was the threshold, he knew it. Detention versus conversation. Once an officer gives a directional command tied to restraint, the legal ground shifts. Probable cause doesn't have to be solid, just articulable. And articulable can be built from tone, posture, refusal, or simply disagreement. "I haven't done anything wrong," the judge said. "Turn around," the officer replied. Behind him, someone gasped. A child began to cry, not loudly, just enough to fracture the moment. The judge felt heat rise, not anger, not yet, but something heavier. The realization that knowledge of the law did not insulate him from its misuse. He turned. The cuffs didn't come out immediately. Another pause. Another recalculation. The officer spoke in low tones, just out of earshot. Training doctrine calls this tactical deliberation. It often looks like professionalism. It rarely feels like justice. The judge stood facing his driveway, hands at his sides, family watching. From 10 feet away, identity reduced to posture and perceived compliance. Across the street, the neighbor folded his arms. Red and blue lights continued to pulse, washing over badges, over faces, over a man who had spent his career interpreting the law, now being measured by it. And in that moment, the authority he carried every day meant nothing at all. The cuffs clicked softly, not loud, not dramatic, just two small sounds that carried farther than any siren. Metal met wrist, cold, final. The judge didn't resist. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He stood still as the officer tightened them one notch too far, then eased back half a click. Training again. Procedure. Control without spectacle. Yet spectacle was already everywhere. Across the street, a phone lifted higher. On the sidewalk, another neighbor angled for a clearer view. A car slowed as it passed. Brake lights glowing red. The driver's head turned just long enough to take in the image. A black man in handcuffs on his own lawn, police lights strobing against a house that looked exactly like every other house on the block. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." The judge's daughter began to cry, not loudly, the kind of cry that tries to stay contained and fails anyway. His wife reached for her instinctively, pulling her close, whispering words that didn't land because nothing made sense anymore. "Daddy." The child said. "What did you do?" He closed his eyes for a moment. "Just long enough to breathe. I didn't do anything," he said softly. The officer nearest him shifted his weight. "Sir, don't speak to anyone right now, not accusatory, not cruel, just firm." The kind of instruction that turns a human being into a liability. The barbecue was over. No one said it out loud, but it was understood. The grill still burned unattended, smoke rising into the evening air like a signal no one wanted to answer. Plates sat half-filled on the table. A balloon bumped against a fence and popped. No one laughed. The questions came next, not to him, but around him. Who else is here? Anyone else live in the house? Any prior calls to this address? Each question was logged. Each answer filtered through radios and notebooks. The officers moved with quiet efficiency, spreading out slightly now, establishing a perimeter that no longer served any clear purpose except to be seen. The judge stood cuffed, listening to his own life being summarized incorrectly. Across the street, the neighbor was already receding. Not physically, he was still there, but narratively. His role was done. The call had been made. The system had arrived. From this point forward, it would protect itself. No officer asked him to clarify what he meant by aggressive. No one pressed him on the claim of fear. His statements, vague as they were, had already been converted into justification. The judge knew this pattern. He had seen it from the bench. Once an arrest posture is assumed, facts bend to support it. Reports are written backward. Language becomes elastic, non-compliant, uncooperative, elevated tone. Words that sound objective until you know how easily they're applied. Why is he in cuffs? Someone asked from the yard. The officer didn't answer. Another neighbor, older, white, uneasy, stepped forward. He lives here, she said. He's always been. This is his house. The officer nodded politely, then turned away, courtesy without correction. The judge felt something heavier than anger settle in his chest. A slow, quiet weight. Humiliation didn't arrive as shame, it arrived as clarity. The realization that his status, his education, his title meant nothing once the narrative was set. He thought of cases he had ruled on. Defendants who had stood before him insisting they were misunderstood. He remembered how often he had believed the reports. How clean the language had looked on paper. Now he was inside it. An officer read him his rights. The words were correct, precise, delivered from memory. They sounded different when spoken on your own driveway, under your own porch light, while your child watched. "Do you understand these rights as I've explained them to you?" "Yes," the judge said. Of course he did. A patrol car door opened. The interior light glowed briefly, illuminating the back seat. Vinyl, hard plastic. The smell of disinfectant and heat. The officer gestured toward it. "Have a seat." The judge turned his head slightly, just enough to see his family one last time before being placed inside. His wife met his eyes. No panic, just resolve. The kind built from necessity. "It's going to be okay," she said. Not because she believed it, but because someone had to say it. The door closed. The sound was final, a sealed space. The world outside reduced to flashing color and muffled sound. Inside the car, the judge sat upright, hands cuffed behind him, knees pressed against molded plastic. He stared forward, watching the reflection of his own house ripple across the partition window, distorted by light. Outside, officers spoke quietly among themselves. Radios crackled. Somewhere, a supervisor was being updated. The phrasing would be careful, concertative, protective. By the time the car pulled away from the curb, the neighbor had already gone back inside. The street returned to stillness, but something essential had been stripped from it. And as the patrol car turned the corner, carrying a man who knew the law better than most, one truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't about misunderstanding anymore. It was about what happens once the system decides not to look back. The sirens were gone. So were the lights. What remained was paper. 3 days after the arrest, the judge sat at his dining table, the same one that had held bowls of potato salad and paper plates just a week earlier. Now it was covered in manila folders, printed emails, a spiral notebook filled with tight, controlled handwriting. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been since the night of the barbecue. Not peaceful, careful. The first document arrived by certified mail. An incident report, 8 pages long, typed, clean, clinical. Officers responded to a call reporting aggressive behavior and possible threats. Upon arrival, subject appeared agitated and failed to comply with verbal commands. The judge read the lines slowly, then again, agitated. He remembered his own voice, measured, calm, intentionally low. He remembered asking permission to retrieve his wallet. He remembered stepping back when told. He underlined the word once, hard. The bodycam footage was next. His attorney, an old colleague who had stood across from him in court more times than he could count, plugged a laptop into the wall and pressed play. The room filled with static, then the sound of a car door opening. Gravel crunching under boots. A voice, evening. The timestamp glowed in the corner. 1842:11. They watched without speaking. The footage didn't lie, but it didn't explain either. It captured gestures without context, pauses without intention. When the officer interrupted him, the camera framed it as efficiency, not dismissal. When the judge asked questions, the audio flattened his tone, stripped it of warmth. "This is where it turns," the attorney said quietly, pausing the video. On screen, the neighbor's voice crackled through the radio playback. "I don't feel safe." That phrase, the attorney continued, that's the hinge. In police procedure, fear doesn't have to be proven. It only has to be claimed. Training doctrine allows officers to escalate based on perceived threat, especially when a caller asserts discomfort. The threshold is intentionally low, designed for speed, not nuance. They resumed the video. The moment the cuffs came out, the camera tilted downward. The frame filled with driveway concrete. The humiliation lived off-screen. Internal Affairs opened a preliminary review 2 weeks later. Not because of outrage, not because of headlines. Because the judge filed a formal complaint, and because he knew exactly how to file it. He cited policy numbers, use of force continuums, detention standards. He referenced state statutes governing unlawful arrest and federal civil rights law 42 U.S.C. Section 1983 language that turns misconduct into liability. Emotion never appeared in the complaint. That mattered. The department's response followed protocol, an acknowledgement letter, neutral language, no admission of fault. The officers were placed on administrative review, not leave. Body cam footage was secured. Statements were requested. In one statement, an officer wrote that the judge appeared confrontational. In another, that he failed to de-escalate. The judge read those words with something close to disbelief. Not because they were false, but because he knew how easily they would sound true to someone who wasn't there. Dispatch logs were subpoenaed next. The 911 call transcript ran 4 pages. The neighbor's voice was calm, measured, concerned. He never used slurs, never raised his voice. He didn't have to. There's a group of men. They're loud. I don't recognize them. I don't feel safe. Each line was time-stamped. Each one replayed in a deposition weeks later. Why did you feel unsafe? The attorney asked the neighbor. I just did, he replied. You can't put a feeling into words, but in court, feelings are words. And words have weight. Experts were consulted. former law enforcement supervisors, use of force trainers. One noted that officers are trained to treat judicial credentials as neutral information, not authority. Another acknowledged that once handcuffs are introduced, officers are psychologically committed to the arrest, even if facts weaken. The judge listened to these assessments with a strange detachment. He understood them academically. He had cited similar testimony and opinions. Understanding didn't soften the damage. Video of the arrest leaked quietly, not to national news at first, but to community pages, local blogs, then regional outlets picked it up. The headline was careful: "Judge detained during neighborhood dispute." Comments were not. Some defended the officers. Others questioned the neighbor. Many argued past one another, never touching the core issue: how easily the system had moved and how difficult it was to slow it down. Mediation failed. The city's attorneys reviewed the case internally. They watched the footage, read the reports, compared the neighbor's claims to what the camera showed. The discrepancy was subtle but enough. A risk assessment memo circulated. It didn't mention morality. It mentioned exposure, jury perception, settlement ranges. 8 figures appeared on a page for the first time. Depositions followed. Long days in quiet rooms. Officers answered questions carefully, often beginning with "I don't recall." The neighbor shifted in his seat when asked whether the barbecue had been loud enough to violate ordinance. He admitted he hadn't checked the time or the noise level. He admitted he hadn't spoken to anyone before calling. That mattered too. Months passed. The judge returned to the bench eventually. Though something in him had shifted, he ruled carefully, precisely, but with a new weight behind his eyes. He had seen the law from the other side of the camera. When the settlement conference finally ended, there was no gavel, no statement, just signature. The city agreed to pay $8 million. Policy changes were announced quietly. Revised dispatch screening, updated trend on bias recognition, mandatory supervisory approval before handcuffing during non-violent calls. The language was technical, bureaucratic, necessary but insufficient. The neighbor moved away before the case closed, and as the final document was filed, stamped, and archived, one truth remained, clearer than any video or transcript. The system didn't break that night. It worked exactly as it was built. The settlement didn't arrive with applause. It came as an email, a subject line, a PDF attachment, language negotiated down to the last comma. $8 million. No admission of wrongdoing. No apology written in plain words. Just a number large enough to acknowledge harm without naming it. The judge read the document alone in his chambers after hours, the courthouse quiet except for the low hum of fluorescent lights. He didn't feel relief. He didn't feel vindication. What he felt was distance between what had happened and what this resolution could ever touch. Money doesn't rewind time. It doesn't erase the sound of cuffs closing or the look on a child's face when the law takes her father away for doing nothing at all. The city issued a statement the next morning, carefully worded. Forward-looking. While we stand by the professionalism of our officers, we recognize the need to improve community trust. Trust, framed as a technical issue. Something adjustable. Behind closed doors, consequences rippled outward. One officer was reassigned. Another resigned months later, citing personal reasons. Supervisors updated training schedules. Dispatchers attended bias awareness seminars. The reforms were real but incremental, calibrations to a machine that still moved fast when fear was introduced. The neighbor's laugh unraveled more quietly. He sold his house at a loss, the listing photo still showing the porch where he had stood with his phone that night. He stopped attending neighborhood meetings. Former friends avoided eye contact. He would later tell someone he never meant for it to go that far. That phrase followed him. Never meant. Intent once again was separated from outcome. The neighborhood never quite recovered. The barbecue returned the following summer, but smaller, quieter. Music kept lower than necessary. People looked up when cars slowed. Children noticed the difference even if they couldn't name it. The judge remained. He continued to serve, to interpret statutes, to weigh evidence with the same discipline he always had. But there was a new restraint in him, now not of judgment, but of illusion. He no longer believed the system corrected itself naturally. He knew it required pressure, persistence, paper trails. When new cases came before him, excessive force claims, unlawful detentions, he listened differently. Not more sympathetically, more precisely. He asked better questions. He noticed what reports left out. Justice, he learned, is not blind. It sees exactly what it's trained to see. At a public forum months after the settlement, He was asked whether the outcome felt like justice. He paused. Then he said it felt like accountability. And those are not the same thing. The room was silent, because accountability has limits. It compensates. It reforms. It deters. Sometimes justice heals. And healing takes more than money, more than policy updates, more than statements drafted by committees. The final cost of that phone call was not $8 million. It was the permanent knowledge that safety, when defined by fear instead of fact, becomes a weapon. That authority, when unchecked, accelerates faster than truth. And that systems built for efficiency will always sacrifice nuance first. On paper, the case is closed. In the neighborhood, it never fully will be. Some evenings, when the air is heavy and the grill is lit again, the judge still looks down the street before he laughs. Not because he expects sirens, but because he knows how quickly they can come. Justice didn't feel like victory in the end. It felt like exhaustion. And perhaps that too is part of the cost.